In the 18th century, a woman gave birth to a new generation. No, not like that. Onan Lavoisier was born in France in 1758 to a high society family. Her dad was a tax collector for the French government, and probably not very well liked by the general public. Unfortunately, her mom passed when Marie-Anne was only 3 years old. Her dad sent her to a convent for some kick-ass learning. For a little while. Society had expectations, including arranged marriages. When she was 12, ripe for the picking. Fucking gross. This very rich, very powerful, very old dude told her dad he wanted her. If dad refused, it would ruin him. He'd lose his job, his reputation, and his daughter. But he actually loved her and found a loophole by arranging a much better match for his daughter. His name was Onan Lavoisier, and he was only 28. 28 to 12. Well, that's a great power dynamic, isn't it? A lot of folks right here are going to come at me with, well, that's just the way it was done back then. But if everybody stuck to that kind of reasoning, we'd be reverting back to the 18th century right now. Let's move on before that shit gets too real. Setting aside that disgusting age difference, all sources said that theirs became a deep and abiding love, though they never had any offspring. Well, outside of the lab. Oh, did I forget to say that he was a rather famous chemist? Well, he was also very disorganized. You know the type, pile of papers everywhere, don't know where anything is. Well, lucky for him, Marie-Anne was not just brilliant, she was very, very organized and thorough. So by 1773, when she was 15 and well into their marriage, she set up a filing and finding system for his data and notes. And all of a sudden, he could find what he needed when he needed it. She also studied and learned as much as she could about chemistry because she wanted to work with him. Well, society had expectations. About women's roles. Contrary to society, he considered her his equal, his collaborator, and welcomed her into his lab. She was a talented artist and sketched, everything. Diagrams, detailed drawings of their equipment, and people in the room, including at least one print where she included herself drawing and taking notes. Because fucking duh, she should have. Sorry, going on. In Antoine's book, there are 13 copperplate illustrations that she did. Remember I said she was thorough? Yeah, she was with notes, too. Details about the equipment, the supplies, the minerals, everything. The environmental conditions, and the people in the room that were affecting the experiment. That sort of shit. Oh, wait, I forgot something else. Sources said she was vital to Antoine's success, and the only reason he was successful on an international scale, because he refused to learn any language other than French, and she had a gift for language. She would receive foreign chemistry articles and translate them for him, including her own annotations, expanding on the theories that were there. Antoine would test the information in the paper, prove or disprove whatever was in there. Then it went back to her to be retranslated so it could be circulated. As an aside, with all of that I just said, I found her called a secretary quite a lot. Like, way to undercut her fucking intelligence. Anyway, I know she was only a woman, but she also managed their finances. She generously donated to any cause that supported, women's education, equal opportunities, folks in need. In their spare time, she and Antoine loved traveling, and she recorded the details of their travels as well. But it wasn't just traveling. They were gathering samples and data to be used back at home. She made sure they were labeled, because if he was left up to it, he would have never found his shit. So like most scientists back then, they worked from home, in an impressive and welcoming lab in their Parisian apartment. Oh, but society still had expectations. Society, you gotta be social, right? So twice a week, every week, they would host dinner parties for people in the scientific community. It was considered a huge honor to be invited. And you didn't have to be a professional to get an invite. But it wasn't just food and small talk. They were observing and participating in experiments. And networking. Look, you can't advance science without having a network of scientists who have advanced. Or something. And she developed a very large network. So at the time, other scientists were discovering things like oxygen and hydrogen. Antoine was apparently known for borrowing other people's work without giving them credit. So he borrowed the work of two other guys to prove that water is not an element, but a compound. Then he and Marie-Anne performed the first ever experiments on human oxygen consumption. They further proposed names and classifications for elements and compounds, and ultimately, quote, formed the basis of the modern classification of the chemical elements. Oh, and I can't forget the development of the scientific method. Yeah, all that detailed shit that she did. Chemistry was definitely moving farther and farther away from alchemy. Now, they were known as progressive. Antoine openly supported social reform, education, including for women, all that shit. But that whole borrowing without credit thing, and there's a good chance he was also involved in tax collections, and shit kind of went south. Because unfortunately for him, at the same time their scientific star was rising, folks in France were getting pretty damn tired of rich folks telling them to just get a better job if they didn't like how things were. You know, maybe stop buying a mug of ale every day from Buckstars. Cue the French Revolution, large portions of which I don't disagree with. So if you didn't know, taxation is one of the many reasons why people can't make ends meet. And well, rich folks started losing their heads because their tax cuts. Quite literally losing their heads over that. The Lavoisier's properties and possessions, including all their research and equipment, were seized by revolutionary authorities. In 1794, Antoine was arrested for defrauding the state. You know, the taxes. But he was convicted of treason and sent to the guillotine. Remember I mentioned their deep love? Some evidence for that came in a letter that he sent to her shortly before his execution. He begged her not to sacrifice her health over the pain of his loss. He said, "I have always enjoyed a happy life. You have made it so." She was never the same after. She blamed his former colleagues. They held powerful roles in the new government and never uttered a word in defense of his work. Or of him. Had to protect their political asses and all, right? One of the ways she coped was through honoring Antoine. See, when the revolution began, he saw the writing on the wall and intended to write his memoirs, including everything they had discovered. But he never got the chance. So she did it for him, even after she met another guy. Wait, what? Yeah. See, as early as 1795, she was taking her life back. She personally demanded that the revolutionary government return everything to her. Every single book, instrument, notebook, and mineralogical specimen that once belonged to her husband. And they actually did. So she continued, experimenting, cataloging, sketching, annotating. Eventually, a couple volumes of his memoirs were published. She also continued networking and hosting those dinner parties. And men showed up, which at the time was kind of incredible, since they were there for science and not fucking. You know, a woman thinking, ugh, fuck's sake, people. Anyway, it was at one of those dinner parties that she met that other guy. He was an American scientist who had abandoned his wife and daughter in America when they discovered he had been a British spy during the American Revolution. He's called Count Rumford, and his specialty was heat conduction. Marie-Anne agreed to get hitched, and he significantly benefited from her network of scientists. Alas, they were divorced after only 4 years of marriage. Marie-Anne continued Antoine's work through the end of her life. She welcomed and collaborated with anyone who visited her, and she kept up those dinner parties that were not just about the food. By the time of her passing in 1836, Marie-Anne had recovered most of Antoine's notebooks and work. One source said her handwriting and sketches were all over everything, and many of his notebooks were in only her handwriting, which made me kind of wonder if he didn't borrow her work too. Today, you can find her research and more in various museums and universities. She's right there every time somebody new learns about the scientific method, or how certain nomenclature is used in the scientific world. And on all those late nights, while you're sobbing your way through the cramming for your chemistry final, you can thank Onan Lavoisier, the mother of modern chemistry. I told you she gave birth to a new generation.